Mixing is a crucial step for creating professional sounding music, but it often feels overwhelming. So in this video, I want to share with you my top rules for mixing, my do's and don'ts for mixing. And these do's and don'ts apply no matter what DAW you're using. If you're working in GarageBand or Pro Tools or Logic, same rules. Or no matter where you are in your journey, if you're just beginning at mixing, these rules apply. If you're intermediate, if you've been mixing for a while, these same rules apply. If you're an expert, you're still following these same rules. So they're going to help you get a more professional sounding mix and feel less overwhelmed by the mixing process. Welcome back to the Band Guide, where we use GarageBand to create professional sounding music. I'm your band guy, Colin. Let's dive in. Now, before we get into my rules of mixing, I want to invite you into the studio with me and my band Broke Royals. We're going into the studio at the end of this month and we're recording our third full-length album. And I want you to come watch the process. I want you to come be a fly on the wall while we're recording it so you can really see what we're doing. We're going to be live streaming the whole thing. And I don't mean just little snippets of live streams. We're going to be setting up multiple cameras throughout the studio and flipping back and forth throughout different points in the day so you can really see the inner workings of a professional recording session. You can see where we put our time, where we put our energy, so that you can take those same things and apply them to your music. You can see how we're getting the results that we get. Because ultimately, as I've said before, it's a lot less about the gear, it's a lot more about how you use it. So what are we doing in the studio to use it in the right way? So come watch, there's a link in the description below. It's going to be completely free, but you have to sign up. It's not going to be a public live stream. So if you want to join, you have to sign up in the link below. And the link in this video is going to close January 28th. So be sure to sign up before January 28th if you want to join. So sign up right now. Let's go ahead and dive into some do's and don'ts. Do number one. Get it right at the source. And what I really mean by this is get it right while you're recording it. While you're working on the recording process, get it right. Get the tone that you want. Get the sound that you want. You'll be able to tweak things. You'll be able to perfect things. But if you have a bunch of things that don't quite sound the way you want them to while you're recording, you're not going to be able to fix all those things when you're mixing. You're just going to be kind of trying to polish something that doesn't sound too good. You know the expression. If you want it to sound the best it possibly can, you have to get it right while you're recording it. So if you ever find yourself saying, well, I'll just fix it in the mix, you gotta stop. You can't fix it in the mix. You need to record like you can't mix, okay? When that brings me to don't number one. Don't plan to fix it in the mix or fix it in the master. If your song has a bunch of things that you wanted to just fix in the mix, well, then your mix is going to sound like you just plan to fix it in a mix. And when I say this, I don't mean if you just have some low-end rumble in a vocal mic that you're just going to cut out with a high-pass filter. I don't mean that. I'm saying if you don't like the way something sounds while you're recording it, then spend a little bit more time in the recording phase. And sometimes this means putting an EQ on something. If you're really not getting the brightness out of an acoustic guitar, go ahead and throw that on while you're recording and make sure before you move on from the recording process that it sounds the way you want. And then when you go to mix, you're doing less work in the mixing stage of things. But if it's not working while you're recording, then you probably want to spend a little bit more time recording, playing around with mic placement, playing around with acoustic treatment in your room. You want to get the best recording possible. That's going to give you the best mix possible. And same thing when it comes to mixing and mastering. Don't ever think, well, I'll just fix it in the master. I'll send it off and I'll have it mastered and it's going to sound awesome. It's only going to sound like basically a slightly maybe more hyped, balanced version of your mix that's louder. It's not going to sound way, way better, right? If your mix doesn't sound great, if you're not stoked on the way your mix sounds, the master's not going to sound amazing. So if it's not sounding right to you, spend a little bit more time on that mix. Try to craft that mix and make it sound as good as possible. The best way to do this is with reference tracks. And that brings me to do number two. Use reference tracks. You want to use reference tracks at all steps along the process. In the songwriting, when you're trying to think about arrangements or instrumentation, Listen to songs that kind of remind you of the song that you're working on. Listen to inspiration and then pay attention to what kind of instrumentation they have, what kind of arrangements they have. But then in the recording process, pay a lot of attention to, well, do they have a lot of brightness? Is their snare really cracky? Is that guitar really bright or is that guitar kind of muffled? Maybe I want this guitar to be kind of muffled too. You're not copying, you're learning. You're picking up tools of the trade. You're already listening to a vetted source, something you think sounds great, to help your music sound great. It's not going to sound exactly the same. It's a different song. You wrote it differently. You have different instrumentation. You have different guitars. Everything is different. It's not going to sound the same. But if you use those reference tracks as guide rails, it will help you get a better recording. And then when you're mixing, it's going to help you set better volume levels. If you're listening to your reference and saying, well, how loud is their vocal relative to their snare drum? Listen to a reference. Go back to your song. Oh, that snare needs to be a little bit louder. Oh, that vocal's not quite loud enough. Use reference tracks. And then when you move on to the mastering phase, you're also using reference tracks to really make sure the tonal balance is right and all those things are working the way that they should. So number 2, don't record and mix in a vacuum. You shouldn't. Music exists in this world and you want your music to hold up against other songs in this world. So you need to be referencing while you're working on it. It feels intimidating, but if you do it at every step along the way, your music is going to sound so much better. Just be really laser focused on what you're working on at any given moment. Am I recording a guitar part? Okay, how did their guitars sound, right? Be laser focused. It's going to help your music tremendously. Do number 3, focus on what matters most: volume, EQ, and compression. In that order: volume, EQ, and compression. Those are the 3 most important tools you have to make your music sound great and sound professional. So first, if your volumes are not set right, so if you follow my 6-step mixing process, if you haven't seen that video, I'll link to it up here. If your volumes are not set right in your static mix, it's going to be way harder to make every other decision along the way. At the end of the day, the only thing people are going to hear is one stereo file of your song. So they're never going to know how awesome your guitar sounded in solo in your mix, right? If it's soloed, it does not in your song. They're only going to hear how everything sounds together. So you got to get your volumes right because that's going to affect what kind of decisions you make. And then you need to make EQ decisions. And you need to constantly be assessing, is my static mix or my volumes set at the right level? And if so, then good, leave them. But if your EQ, if you added some brightness, maybe your vocal should come down a little bit now because it sounds a little louder. If you've done EQ Expert, you know what I'm talking about. You need to be really focusing on volume, EQ, and compression. Compression is going to tame the dynamics. It's going to help things sound fatter and more present and just larger than life. So it's a very crucial step as well. If you really want things to sound full and punchy and present, compression is a huge tool for that. So volume, get your volume right. Spend time in that stage just getting volume balanced, right? And then your EQ, making sure your EQ sounds great and everything is clear and everything is full in the way you want it to be. And then use your compression to balance your dynamic, making sure everything is present and everything is full throughout your whole mix. Number 3, don't get distracted or worried about super specific tips and tricks. I want you to hear this loud and clear. 90% of your mix, just guessing, is volume, EQ, and compression. Right? So when you're watching YouTube and you're seeing people talk about these super specific, weird mixing tricks that are really cool and really helped a lot in the video that you watched, well, likely it's like 1% in most mixes, or it doesn't even need to be done in most mixes. The reason they're sharing it on YouTube is because it's kind of weird and kind of cool and people are going to click on it. And so then a lot of people are going to watch it, and then you're going to think it's really important because it has 1 million views on it. But in reality, it's like 1% of mixing. 90% of mixing, the day-to-day, is boring. It's volume, it's EQ, and it's compression. So you need to learn those, and you need to nail those if you want to make great sounding music. Which brings me to number 4. Learn your tools. Your knowledge and ability to use the tools you have is the single biggest determinant for how good your music is going to sound. And when I say tools, I really mean volume, EQ, and compression. Reverb, delay, other effects, all those matter, but there are a little more find things you like and then set them and forget them. You don't need to really master those in the same way. EQ, compression, those are tools you have to learn. Those are things you have to learn. Those are things you have to experiment with and get familiar with. I've created an entire course just on EQ. It's a super powerful tool. It's a game changer. And with volume, you just need to practice setting levels, listen to reference tracks, use your ears, trust your ears. You know what good music sounds like. You listen to music, you like the way music sounds. So focus on those three things first: learning your volume, your EQ, and compression. Professional mix engineers are not great because of the gear that they have. They're great because of how they use the gear they have, right? And that brings me to don't number 4. Don't worry about new gear. If you have a setup that allows you to record and mix, then you already have the tools that you need. We're talking about small variations when we're talking about new gear. We're talking about little things. Master what you have, and when you start to notice specific limitations, then buy new gear. Then upgrade your gear if you need to. But right now, with GarageBand on your phone, on your computer, you can make incredible sounding music with the tools that are built into it. So if you want to make better sounding music, you need to master the tools you have and stop worrying about new gear. Do number 5, mix with a plan. Whether it's my 6-step process to a pro mix in GarageBand, I'll link to that up here, or any other workflow, as long as it has volume, EQ, and compression as core tenets, find a plan that you trust, that you have confidence in, follow it, and it will work for you. Working through a plan, working through a process helps eliminate fear. And fear and nerves are a mix killer. Truly, because mixing is not huge, big changes that make things sound drastically different and super cool and awesome. It's a bunch of small stuff that adds up to a good sounding mix. And if you're working through a plan, then you can have that vision along the whole process, as opposed to looking for something that's going to make my mix sound drastically different and better. One of my biggest tips here is export your mix out off the bat. So once you've set your static mix, once you have your volume at levels that you like, just export your mix out right now, right? So you've not done any mixing yet. Then work through the plan, mix it, export it out again, and listen to the two back to back. If you do subtle incremental changes at every step along the way, you're going to end up with great sounding music. And when you listen to the first one that doesn't have any mixing processes done on it, and then to the new one, it's going to sound so much better. So mixing with a plan is crucial. And that brings me to don't number 5. Don't let fear mix your music. Fear leads to huge, drastic changes, huge EQ boosts, huge EQ cuts, 70% reverb on something that needs 10% reverb. We do this because we want to hear that we're doing something. We want to feel like we're doing something because it makes us feel like we're mixing. We're doing something better because we're worried it's not going to sound good. Have a plan and mix through that plan, because as we just said, incremental progress leads to a professional sounding mix. If you're doing huge changes, that's going to kill your mix. It's never going to sound great. Small, incremental changes lead up to a professional sounding mix. So have a plan and follow it, and that's going to help you combat the fear that you're facing. Another tip that I have that I love and I use to this day, it's still one of my biggest tips, is the half rule. I don't know if that's ever been called it anywhere else or if anybody else is talking about this, but it's a rule that is basically just set it where you can hear it, it sounds good to you, it's maybe a little extreme, and then literally half it. So if reverb sounds really great at 60%, we'll set it at 30%. Or if your EQ boost sounds great at 10 decibels, half it down to 5 decibels. If you do this, you're going to end up with a way more natural sounding mix. And then when you're revisiting your mix, when you're doing a round of revisions or something, you could always scale it back up. You could always go up to 10 decibels on that boost if you need to, or 60% on that reverb if you need to. Whatever you need to help it sound the way you want it to. But don't start there. Don't start there. Start with half of what you think you need, and it will change your mixes. I guarantee it. Now, if you want to see me and my band Broke Royals working really hard to nail do number 1, getting it right at the source, sign up at the link in the description below. Come join us in the studio. Watch us work through that process. Getting it right at the source is so important. It's the most important, probably. That's why I put it number one. If you spend time in that stage, your raw tracks are going to sound better than most people's final mixes. So getting it right at the source is the most important thing you can do. And at the end of the day, it's basically just still mics going into an interface, going into a computer. That's all we're really doing. We've got some different gear because we'll be working in a professional studio, but that's not what's making it sound great. It's getting it right that's going to make it sound great. So come watch us. Come see how we're doing this. I really think it will help you out to see how not drastically different a pro session is. Right? Come watch us. Come watch us in real time. Sign up in the link in the description below. It closes next Thursday, so be sure to sign up before then. If this video is helpful to you, be sure to subscribe. Before you go, I want to know, what do's are you already doing? What don'ts do you need to stop don'ting? Let me know in the comments below. Again, if this video is helpful, be sure to subscribe, sign up to join us in the studio next week, and I'll see you in the next video.